thrilled to have Helena James reach out and tell us that she wanted to go ahead and moderate this conversation. Now, Helena is a lover of Black art and Black literature. Me personally, when I need something new to do around Chicago, I go and check out her page. And just what's going on for Black art and Black literature lovers. She lives to empower Black voices, so please make sure that you all go ahead, give her a follow after this conversation, and please give her a huge round of applause.
Thank you, Courtney and Ms. B. Thank you for letting me bully my way into this space. Good evening, everyone. It is my absolute honor to welcome New York Times bestseller, Sadeqa Johnson. Johnson is an acclaimed author of several award-winning novels, including Yellow Wife, clap if you read it. This won the 2022 Library of Virginia Literary People's Choice Award. And The House of Eve. A Reese's Book Club selection, it earned widespread national recognition. Across her work, she has become known for bringing deeply researched history together with unforgetting, emotionally rich storytelling. Her sixth and newest novel, The Keeper of Lost Children, hold it up. I like audience participation. Tells an expansive World War II era story following a displaced young girl, a woman caring for children left behind by war, and a Black American soldier. Please join me in welcoming Sadeqa.
Hello, it's so good to see you guys. Oh my gosh, y'all don't know, I bullied my way into coming to Chicago, okay? It was not originally on my tour, and I was like, I gotta come see my people.
Yes.
So thank you so much for having me.
I am so honored to be speaking here with you. It is evident that you honor our stories, especially those kept uncovered. The last few books in particular feel like a proper homegoing or a burial service to those stories that are really important, so I really thank you. And I know we don't have very much time, so I'm gonna jump right in. I'm gonna jump right in with my first question. So, what was the moment when The Keeper of Lost Children first insisted on being written? Was it a character, a historical discovery, or an emotional question that you couldn't walk away from?
Well, I love how you said insistent. So you must know me a little well already.
A little bit.
Because I always say that stories find me, and I just have to be in the receiving mode to receive them. It's not always a choice. It wasn't a choice to write historical fiction. It was more the ancestors telling me what they wanted. And so I was tucked away at a little writing retreat that I go to in the Blue Ridge Mountains in Virginia when I'm working on a story. Because, you know, when I'm working at home, then I'm always plugged with the question, Mom, what's for dinner? And that's distracting. So I need to kind of go off into the mountains and write. And I was working on The House of Eve, which I think I was maybe like on the 6th or 7th draft. Yeah, the book doesn't just fall off my fingers and then you get it. I was working on like the 6th or 7th draft, and I write and I research, I write and I research, and I was doing some research, and I think I popped into the search bar, orphans, unwanted children, and up popped Mabel Grammer. And Mabel Grammer was a Black American journalist. She married a chief warrant officer in the United States Army. This was in about 1950. He went to Mannheim, Germany, so she followed him over to Germany. And while she was there, she was a little bit isolated. She didn't speak the language, her husband was working a lot, and she also couldn't have children because of a childhood illness. And she was a little bit down about all of these things. She was a devout Catholic, and she was in church, and these Catholic nuns invited her to come and visit and volunteer at an orphanage. And when she got there, she discovered a gaggle of mixed-race children, a little-known consequence of World War II, where there was an influx of African-American soldiers that went over to Germany during World War II and during the occupation of Germany. and they met German women. And we know what happens when you have a relationship. Well, children are born. And these children were sort of caught between two worlds, because this is, again, the 1940s, the 50s, and so Jim Crow is alive and well in America and carried over into some of these military bases by the commanding officers. And so when one of the black GIs wanted to marry their German brides, they had to get permission. And 93% of them were denied. Oftentimes, if they had a baby or wanted to get married, the government, the army, would then separate them and send them somewhere else to work, maybe some other place in Europe, or send them back home, which would then leave the German woman alone with a baby. And she had two issues. The baby was illegitimate, because in the 40s and the 50s, you know, marriage really did matter. And it brought a lot of status to your life. And then these children were mixed race. And so they would lose their rations in Germany. Sometimes they lost their job. If they wanted to marry a German man and move on, oftentimes he would not accept their mixed race child. And so he would make them choose, it's us or them. And so they were in a pickle. And so oftentimes these children were abandoned to orphanages. And when Mabel Grammer discovered them, she decided that something needed to be done. She started a one-woman adoption agency. She moved over 500 of these children into loving African-American homes, both in Germany and also here in the United States. And she and her husband adopted 12 of these children herself. 12. I have 3, guys. And on a good day, they're driving me bananas, right? So 12 kids they adopted, but her heart was so big and she was so pure, and she changed the face of history for these children, that as I was reading and watching all the things that I was discovering about her, I kept thinking to myself, why am I just learning about her by accident? Like, why didn't we learn about her in social studies? I took women's history in college. Like, why didn't she come up before now? And so in that moment, I realized that this was a story that needed to be told. And I could feel, you know, what happens to me is I could feel like my solar plexus sort of light up, right? And I could feel that like quickening of my breath, and that the hairs on my arms stand up. And so I'm excited about writing this story. But I was there to work on The House of Eve, and I was on a deadline. And so I said to myself, you got 15 minutes to write down everything that you were thinking about, the plot points, the story. I wrote it down, I bookmarked all the things in the computer, and then I had to step away from it for a couple of months. So that was sort of the origin story of Keeper of Lost Children.
Okay, so I have a few follow-up questions. The first is my question about, like, was it a character historical discovery or an emotion? It sounds like it was all 3. And it sounds like that is what really drives that initial writing process, that initial draft. You said you were at like 6 or 7 drafts into The House of Eve. How many drafts did it take for us to get to this published book?
Usually it's about 7 or 8, depending. Yeah, depending on how much work I have to do. But 7 or 8 is usually the number.
Wow. Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And I appreciate you walking us through the history. I think after having read this book now, I think that history is such good context and going into it before you guys read it. So I do want to move on to the next question. So this novel moves through 3 different perspectives. How did you approach structuring these lives so that they eventually speak to one another, but also secondary is which character was the most challenging to write and which came to you the easiest?
So my agent kept saying to me, Sadeqa, this is your most ambitious book yet. And I was like, why does she keep saying that? Like, I've written 5 other books. But it was because, you know, when I wrote The House of Eve, I wrote 2 characters, Eleanor and Ruby. The structure was sort of what we call A-B. You know what's coming next. You're gonna read a chapter of Ruby, then Eleanor, then Ruby, then Eleanor, A-B. And so I thought, well, what's one extra character? And you know, they say going from 2 children to 3 children is not a big deal. big deal. So the same thing with writing a book. So going from 2 characters to 3 characters was a big deal. And then I had the nerve to write them in 3 different time periods. So when you meet Mabel, she is in 1950, she's in Mannheim, Germany. And then we have Ozzie Phillips, which this is my first time writing from a male perspective. But I just knew that Ozzie's story was one that I wanted to tell because I was very curious about what it was like for those Black American GIs. I find that there are thousands of World War II books, right? Many documentaries, many movies that we see, you know, and the Black man is largely left out of these stories. And so I was very curious about what his story was. I saw my great uncle at a family reunion. He's 94 years old, and he served in the Air Force in the 40s and the 50s. And so when I saw him, I was like, this is the story I'm thinking about writing. Like, tell me a little bit about your experience, like being, you know, from America and then going into Europe. He wasn't in Germany, but what was that like? And so just hearing a little bit about his experience, and then looking at documentaries where Black men were talking about, you know, like the Germans and the English didn't really care that they were Black. They loved having them around. They liked dancing with them. They thought they were friendly. They thought that they were nice. But it was always our government sort of kind of keeping them in their place. And so my thought with Ozzie was like, so what is that feeling? Like, what does that feel like to be in this situation? And so you meet Ozzie. He's a 19-year-old boy from South Philadelphia. I grew up in Philly. And he goes over to Germany, and when he gets there, he volunteers actually for the Army. He really wants to go to college, but he can't afford it. And so this is the next best thing for him. And when he gets to Germany, he experiences this freedom that didn't exist for him before. And he meets a German woman named Jelka. And they have this relationship that sort of changes the trajectory of their lives. And then we have Sophia, which I think that Sophia, you know, I have this propensity of writing this young girl, 16, 17, right? You see her in Phoebe and Yellow Wife, you see her in Ruby in the House of Eve. And so now we have Sophia. She is 16, she's living on this rundown, desolate farm in southern Maryland. She does more before school than what we do all day long between the chickens and the hens and the vegetables and all the things. So she really feels like farm life is not suited for her. Her family, she feels like, doesn't love her, and she just really wants to be anywhere but there. And she is given this very rare opportunity to go to a boarding school. Her story takes place in 1965. And when she gets to the boarding school, she finds that she is one of the first African American students to come to the school. And this is a whole host of issues and search for understanding and feelings of not enoughness that she has to experience. And so those are my 3 characters. I think the hardest one to answer your question, Ethel is the character that is inspired by Mabel Grammer, who started this whole thing, and believe it or not, she was the hardest one for me to write. I think it was because when I am bringing to life a character, I really want to give you their full everything, but sometimes that doesn't lend itself to fiction. So Mabel was so angelic and so good that I was like, ooh, we need a little more dirt here. We need some juice. Yeah, we need some juice, we need some dirt, we need some conflict, or otherwise you're not gonna read my story. And so I had to introduce these other characters to sort of muck it up a little bit.
That is like so perfectly aligned to my next question. At risk of me asking spoilery questions of these characters, I do want to pivot a little bit, but it's related. So I see your research as really detailed. And I think when I think of historical fiction, right, you're putting all these facts together. But I would find it really challenging to understand their interior lives. Like, how do you artistically write that in, knowing all of these facts? And what you said about Ethel is related to that question.
I do the research, and oftentimes the research informs my plot points. So a lot of it is true, but then the fiction part is the way my imagination takes over and imagines the feeling of what they may feel like going through this situation. You know, I've seen some things, I've felt some things myself, and so I can kind of mix all that together to create the fiction. That's the fun part, actually, is when I get to let loose. You know, writing for me, I feel like the conduit. Like my job is to sort of turn my body over and let the characters use me. I see them as sort of like flowing their story through me, and my job is to be the typist to catch it down on page. And so when I do that, I get out of the way. The characters are gonna tell me what they wanna do. Sometimes I'm like, all right, today we're going to Miami. And they're like, we're going to Chicago.
I guess I'm just really impressed, right? Because I think, like you mentioned, the last two books are Black women. And that's something that we obviously can relate to, but like, especially your inclusion of this Black man who's a soldier, who's going abroad and having relations with German women is so outside of the norm and outside of yourself that I just found it really impressive that you would write that in.
Seems like you like the story.
I did like it, yes. Okay, so the other question I have is, throughout the novel, there's this question of who keeps memory alive, especially as we're talking about orphans, right? And there's a quote that I just love. It says, "Where was her life stored and who was keeping track?" And one, I guess, I want to know how you do that.
I forget that I write stuff until people quote
You're
that.
like, wait, I did that. I did that. Well, I want to know, like, how do you do that in your own life? But also, like, I see your writing as an act of preservation. Do you see that as well? And do you see your writing as sort of like memory keeping?
It's funny because my youngest daughter is 17, and I think that out of the three of my children, she is probably the one who's gonna know the most about me. Like when I'm gone, she's gonna be like, well, did you know da-da-da about mommy? And I'll be like, what? Because she asks very deep questions. And so she, you know, I just made that comparison of Phoebe and Ruby and Sophia. And she was like, well, where did that come from? Like, do you feel like that? And sometimes I do, right? Like sometimes I feel like no matter how hard I work, it's never enough. Or like the inner girl, the young girl inside of me always feels like, this isn't it, I need more, or I want more, or, you know, this thing that you gave me is just not enough, I need more, right? Like, so I feel like in my own not enoughness, you kind of get that in these characters, so I am sort of sharing that feeling with them. But I also think like there's bits and pieces of me and my family, and if you, but history too, like, so I'm moshing it all together. Writing is very therapeutic. I always say like my first 3 novels, which was, I always called them contemporary fiction, but I was in Houston, and my conversation partner called it suburban drama. I like suburban drama. But in my suburban drama era, I felt like I was working out either something that I felt or something that my friends felt or something that I saw. Like my second novel, Second House from the Corner, was about this woman named Felicia who, you know, she felt like she was drowning in this stay-at-home momdom with these 3 kids. I felt like I was freaking drowning. And I was like, nobody wants to hear what I have to say, so let me write about it. And so it's definitely a mix and a mash of all those things.
Yeah, so it sounds like your stories are also laced in the pages with history, which I think is really powerful, honestly. So one of the things that I also see in your books is these histories can be quite traumatic. There's a lot happening. How do you protect yourself emotionally while you're writing these stories?
You know, I don't set out to write trauma. But it just is history, right? And as a keeper of history and someone who wants to make sure that I leave a legacy and I leave something behind for those who are coming behind me, it's necessary to write the trauma because it is all up and through our history. Like when I was writing Yellow Wife, I was like, oh my gosh, like it took everything out of me. Like for 2 years, I was absolutely immersed in the world of slavery. I was watching Underground on TV and I was reading Incident in the Life of a Slave Girl on the Beach, right? Like everybody else is reading Jodi Picoult and I'm like reading, and I'm reading something deep and heavy. And so I stayed in that world because I needed to be able to feel it. Yeah. But what I always say is that if our ancestors were strong enough to live through these horrific, traumatic moments in history, the very least I can do is write it. I see myself as the person who's supposed to give a voice to those who did not have a voice. And then I charge my readers with the same thing. At the very least we could do is read it and share it and talk about it. I see my story sort of as a bomb. I want you to feel seen and then talk about that thing that hurt, I talk about deep things, but that's life, right? We all in this room have experienced trauma. And so it's important for us to be able to bond over it and heal from it.
And to me, there is such a high cost in it not being told, right? And I guess that is a question too that I have about this specific book. What is the cost of this story not being told?
Wow. You should hit me with a question I never got before. I've been at this for 3 weeks, okay? I think the cost for us just in general of our history not being told is that we'll just keep repeating the past, right? I tell my kids everything goes back to slavery and Stevie Wonder.
Wait a minute, that's a word.
And if we don't know where we've come from, then there's no way that we can make sense of where we are right now.
Yes, I'm gonna keep that one in my back pocket, that quote forever. I also think that the cost specifically for this story is, like you said in the beginning, there's so many World War II stories, and I have never heard anything remotely like this, and never read anything remotely like this. I am approaching my time, to which I will transition.
She is so together.
I will transition to the audience, but I
Get your questions ready.
Yes, get ready after this question. I want to know what conversations you hope that this book would evoke, or feelings you hope that readers sting.
I really want us to be proud. I really want us to be proud. We stand on the shoulders of amazing, ambitious women. When I think about Mary Lumpkin, who inspired Yellow Wife, the character of Phoebe, and how she had to make a way out of no way, like we stand on her shoulders. Like I get to sit up here and write a book because my great grandmother was a maid. She made the way for me so that I could do this. And so I think that we have always been there, we were always there. The men, in World War II, they were always there. We know them. They're our grandfathers. They're our great uncles. They're our brothers. They were always there. And I think it's important for us to, yes, it's traumatic. Yes, there's a lot of heartache, but we were always the willing workers. We were always having a bake-off to give money to a child going to college. Like we've always, as a community, been there for each other. And I like that this story is a reflection of that.
Absolutely. Okay, I'm gonna open up to the audience. Thank you so much. Any questions? I'll pass the wrong mic. Oh, thank you, Courtney.
I do have a question. So when you said that, of course, if we forget our history, we're doomed to repeat it. I think that I feel for this generation because I feel like they have lost it. It's so many, you know, my great niece is 11 years old, and she thinks Dr. King was ancient. Ma'am, understand? But I understand. So, you know, they are so far removed from slavery and you know, it's almost like in their head, I would never, and you could never. I don't think our ancestors thought they could never, but it's all about the mind. And so in your writing, do you feel that by doing this, you're, I guess, helping or opening up a dialogue for the younger generation to understand we're not so far removed from slavery.
Yeah.
We are in the pickle we are in today because I think we have forgotten where we came from.
Yeah, thank you for that. Yes, I definitely do. Like, I met a girl last night in Cleveland, and she probably was like 18 or 19, and she said, I read Yellow Wife, and I mean, she was literally in tears, and she was like, it changed my whole outlook on the world and me wanting to learn more about my history. And I think the beauty of historical fiction is that I'm teaching you, I'm giving you all the information of the past, but I'm giving you a little sugar to make it a little bit more palpable, right? So you can swallow it a little bit easier because I've woven in fiction. And so I think that these stories are gonna be powerful for the next generation.
Hello. So I think I had a question about like your technical style of writing. Because after reading Yellow Wife and House of Eve, it felt like the endings were they were more open-ended, which I really enjoyed, but I wanted to like understand how did you decide a book was done or the story was done?
Yeah, that's a good question. I get this a lot, that sequel? And I'm like, no. Story is done. So when I'm writing a story, I'm really just thinking about this being a time period in these characters' lives, in this moment of history. And so it doesn't have to be tied up in a neat bow. It just needs to be tied. And so some of my books, that's what happens. I think when you get to Keeper of Lost Children, I actually think I tied it up tighter than I normally do, right? I do, right? You agree? Okay, thank you. So I almost was like, is this too neat? Like, did I do too much here? But I think it was a great ending. I will say, to add on to that, so while I'm not doing sequels, I had to tell my friend Helena, I had to tell Helena that, there's Easter eggs from each book. So there's not a sequel, but like from Yellow Wife into the House of Eve, you get like a little Easter egg, right? Well, pay attention, Keeper fans, because from the House of Eve to Keeper of Lost Children, I gave you an egg and 2 slices of bacon. So there's gonna be some carryover. You're gonna see some characters that you're really excited to see. So make sure you're paying attention.
In one of your books, you said you're the granddaughter of Biddy Brown, who was the granddaughter of a Mandari queen. You a slave in name, but never in your mind. There are certain motivational moments that it seems like you had in your books. Is that a trait that Sadeqa is trying to infuse motivation into your readers? And is that an essence of just yourself and how you talk all the time?
Wow. I feel like that was just a moment in church. Again, I love having my words quoted back to me, especially with that voice. I think that I am always trying to motivate in my work and in my talks. I'm always trying to evoke some motivation, but it also is a link to our past. It's that thing that I said, like, we stand on the shoulders of these strong, ambitious ancestors, and because of them, we can. And that was one of those moments. Pass the mic.
Good evening. Yellow Wife is an amazing book. I'm also an Audible lover, so when I listened to it, I was like, dear God, I gotta take a break. Do you have any decision-making in how the books are produced? And do you have a preference as to when people read the book or listen to it?
I don't have a preference. I'm not a reading snob. I think reading and listening and story ingesting is all the same. So however you come to my stories, I am totally fine with it. Thank goodness I do have a choice. I have worked, I don't know if y'all know, but I started off selling books out the back of my trunk. And so I have worked my way up to the point where I do have say. So I have say on the cover, I have say on my narrators. For Yellow Wife, I selected Robin Miles because I think she's fantastic. For Keeper of Lost Children, for the narration, I was casting the narrators as I was writing the book. So I knew the moment Ozzy walked on the page that I needed to have Adam Lazar White, who, if you listen to S.A. Cosby books, right? Yes. So I knew. I was like, if I can't get Adam Lazar White, then this is not going to be narrated. But I got it.
Ozzy is so hip.
Yes.
I need to reread it.
I want to know who is like your Mount Rushmore authors and what inspires you, like who you think you should like tap back into.
That's always such a hard question because there's so many authors that I just love and admire. I would say like my younger self, like what got me into reading and writing was Maya Angelou. Like I remember reading her memoirs, her series of memoirs in high school, and my friends stealing my books because they were like, girl, all you do is read. Like come jump some double dutch with us, you know? And then Mama by Terry McMillan was really that first book where I saw myself on the page, like I could identify with the character. Now it's a little bit of everybody. Like I'm reading Diane McKinney Whetstone. If you guys know, she wrote Tumbling. She had a book that came out in August and it came so quiet. I didn't even know it came out. It's called Family Spirit. So I've been reading that this week on the plane, and her writing is absolutely beautiful. She is a writer that I can read and study craft. Sometimes I could just read a book just for the entertainment of it, but it's always better for me when I can read and also study the craft of the book. Like before I wrote The House of Eve, I read Before We Were Yours by Lisa Wingate. And her craft of it really inspired the ABAB of The House of Eve because that was the way she wrote it, and I thought it was just so beautifully done. So it really depends on what I need in the moment, which authors inspire me.
Hi, I was supposed to come and see you in Franklin, Indiana tomorrow, but unfortunately I have a funeral to go to tomorrow. So I went to go see where else you were going on tour, and it's so crazy. It just felt like fate that you were going to be in Chicago and I was going to be here too. So I ended up getting tickets to come see you here. So I'm so excited because this has been a wonderful conversation. But I had a follow-up question to her question. With The House of Eve, I was so, like, I gasped and I'm like, no, like, I need her to say something, and I don't want to give too much away, because I don't know if everybody has not read it, but it still pains me that
I got you.
I
got you.
And so I'm just curious, like, when you finish a book and you know, like, okay, this book is finished, I've done what I needed to do here. Do you ever have moments where you're like, okay, I need to do
know
that
more,
differently, or I need to know more? Like,
Yeah.
do you feel like you need to know more of this about the story,
Yeah.
even if you don't release that to the public?
Yes, first of all, I'm so sorry for your loss. I'm really glad that you were able to make it and pivot, because I'm happy to see you, friend. So I hate to disappoint y'all, but when I hit the end of the book, I'm like, hallelujah, doing praise dances. I got an audible, like, woo, I just birthed that baby and I don't want to have to do it again, right? And so that is the general feeling. I understand how you feel about the ending of The House of Eve, but let me tell you this, that wasn't the original ending.
Ooh.
For those who have read it, and I'm not gonna spoil it, I'm just gonna talk in code, okay? So when I turn the book into my agent, my process is I write it, my agents read it. Once my agents give me the thumbs up, then I send it to my editor or they sell it to a publisher, right? So my agents had read it, and one of my agents said to me, we went through A, B with these characters, and we never get to see them together. We don't get that satisfying payoff feeling. And I was like, oh, I didn't even notice that. You know, like I'm just writing the story. It still goes together. And so that original epilogue was from Wilhelmina's voice. It wasn't from Eleanor's voice. So when I went back to figure this thing out, I thought, that's life. Like that can happen. Like that's not what you want as a reader. But like in real life, how many chance coincident moments do we have that we don't even know we're having?
Yeah.
That's the painful part, that your stories feel so real.
Yeah. Human.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Right behind you, yeah.
So I got introduced to Rebel Wife, but I just finished her book, and then there was me.
Oh.
And that was very different.
That's one of those suburban dramas.
Completely drastically different. So I'm just wondering, do you plan to stay in your historical fiction bag, or do you plan to go back to
Suburban dramas. Do you want me to write a suburban drama, or you want me to stay in historical fiction?
Oh.
Thank you, I appreciate that. If you loved And Then There Was Me, I think you'll really like Second House from the Corner. So, again, I write the story that I feel I'm being called to write. And so right now I am being called to write historical fiction. You guys got 3. I think the next book that's sort of, it sits in my belly for a while before I actually start to write it. And I've been so busy with Keeper and being out on the road, so I'm not writing, but I'm thinking. And I think the next book is historical. I will say too, it takes me like 2 years to write a book. So if I wrote faster, I could be like, let me write this suburban drama over here and this historical fiction over there, but we shall see. I did write a short story for Amazon called Fallen Grace, which, y'all know me. Okay. And that's a continuation from The House of Eve. I took one of the characters and just did a short story, so we'll see where we go.
We appreciate your pacing because it pays off.
Yeah.
Every time.
Yeah.
Yeah. Any other questions?
Okay, right here.
One last question.
Okay.
Maybe not so much a question, but I have a event this weekend, Daughters of Haiti. We have a conference, and the big theme is about pivoting, and how as women we're always doing that. And for you, and I have a little more insight just because of my sister's relationship, but I think you exemplify a lot of what we were talking about. Like we start out in one career, then we have kids, then our dreams get put on hold. We don't even realize they're on hold. We forget that we had them. Talk a little bit about what it meant to come back to your first love, to be able to write and do what it is that you love. Later in life, you know, when that's not normally, you know, we all have different phases, but it happens at a different point, and what does that mean? It's gotta be a little more special at this point. But, so not really.
I got you. No, I understand that. Thank you for that. And yeah, I think pivoting and also never giving up. I think my husband always said, like, you're the most dedicated woman that I know, because, you know, I started off as a publicist in publishing. And when I got to publishing, it was like I was already sort of loving books and I thought I could do this. And then I worked on my first novel, which took me 10 years to write, but even longer to get published. Just to give you a snippet, when I got my agent, I only had one kid. By the time she called me to tell me that the last editor that she pitched for that book said no, I had 3 kids. And so it was that never giving up. And so, you know, I didn't get the publishing deal, even though I had a background in publishing. My husband convinced me that we should just self-publish and do a small publishing company and get that first book out. Loving a Carry-On Bag came out in 2012. I dressed those 3 kids up in t-shirts that said, "Buy my mommy's book." And we took it on the road. And so we had this big Nissan Armada and we stuffed the books in and we had retractables and we were out in the streets, y'all. I was at the Harlem Book Festival in 98 degrees, sweating out my makeup, asking people, hand selling my book. And so it wasn't an easy journey for me. You know, from there, I was able to get a 2-book publishing deal for my dramas. That was Second House from the Corner, and then there was me. But then my editor for those 2 books, she left the publishing industry, which means now my books are an orphan. So I finally get my foot in the door, and now nobody's taking care of my work. And, you know, I was standing in my kitchen in 2015 in Springfield, New Jersey, and I heard a voice that said, "Move." And it wasn't like move down the street. It was like move. 4 months later, we're living in Richmond, Virginia. We did not move for family. We did not move for a job. It was just this feeling that I was supposed to be somewhere else. And I remember standing in my little cul-de-sac, happy to see my kids happy, but I didn't know what I was supposed to be doing. 9 months later, I'm on the Richmond Slave Trail with some friends, and I discover the story of Mary Lumpkin, which inspired Yellow Wife. But when I discovered it, it was like, this is a book I want to read. I'm not qualified to write this story. Like, don't you need a PhD in history? Like, how do you write historical fiction? But it was almost as if the ancestors had a different plan for me, because it was like they got in the car with me and they followed me home and they were pressing me and pushing me towards this story. My friend came over and she's like, "What are you working on?" And I'm telling her, and I said, "But I'm so afraid." And she said, "Sadeqa, the thing that scares you most is what you're supposed to be doing next." And that opened the door for this whole pivot of my career, of my life, and I finally made it to what I've always wanted, which was to be a New York Times bestselling author. Thank you, guys.
I'm actually so glad that we ended on that question, because there is a phrase in this book that says you have much to offer others. And I just thank you for offering us this, and thank you for your writing. Thank you for deciding to write and pursuing that career, because we have these books to hold for the next generation, the next and the next. And yeah, just thank you for this conversation. Thank you to the book joint. And I think the book signing is next, y'all.